Welcome to the Beau Show. President Joe Biden has been at the UN COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow, Scotland last week, but he's been, well, sleeping through a lot of it. 130 world leaders were in Glasgow last week, where Prince Charles and Boris Johnson have gathered leaders all over the world together to address what they consider to be a climate crisis. Prince Charles talks about cutting greenhouse gases to mitigate a 1.5 degree warming. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. Incidentally, the logo they created for COP26 is almost identical to the logo of Comedy Central. I find that ironic, actually, because some of what they are doing at this conference is laughable, specifically when it comes to mitigating anything that China does. Remember that of the 130 countries represented at this conference, there are some very notable absentees, such as China, to no one's surprise. They are culprit number one in emissions. Also absent will be Vladimir Putin of Russia, another huge energy supplier, and Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. Representatives from Mexico, South Africa, and Iran will also be absent. All of those are, of course, quite significant, because when you think of the United Nations and all of this posturing to change temperatures by 1.5 degrees, just about anything these countries do, as set forth in the Paris Climate Accord, are in vain if China, Russia, and others are increasing their emissions. And India, another major polluter, said that it's pledging net zero emissions by 2070. Wow, what a pledge! India is the third largest emitter of carbon, and China is number one. So what did Xi Jinping say in a statement, since he deliberately did not come? Well, he called for countries to take, quote, stronger actions, unquote, on climate change. Now that's rich. The guy who is the number one emitter of carbon is calling on these conference attendees to basically work harder, while his country makes the problem worse and is committed to nothing. And while the United States is the second largest emitter of carbon, many oil and gas companies have created technology to reduce those emissions through carbon capturing and storing. It is their innovation that has resulted in the U.S. reducing its carbon emissions by 40%. That's monumental. Yet the oil and gas execs got hammered by Democrats in the House, such as by AOC and Rashida Tlaib. But Republicans hammered those Dems right back. Representative Byron Donalds scolded the chair of his committee, Democrat Carolyn Maloney, for intimidating oil and gas execs when those guys have been innovating their methods and production. Check out what he said.
Mr. Summers, it was asked earlier by a lot of the executives if they believe in electronic vehicles, and it's a noble goal to have. But Mr. Summers, where does where does electricity production actually come from?
Most of the energy in the United States comes from natural gas. It has replaced coal as the primary source of energy in this country.
Let me ask you this question as a follow-up. So if we don't have natural gas, and obviously the Democrats are against coal, where would we actually get the electricity to power all of these electric cars? Where would it come from?
Well, Congressman, for most countries, and for certainly the United States, the energy, there would be likely a fuel switch back from natural gas to coal. So
real quick, Mr. Summers, and I don't mean to cut you off because you make a great point, but I got 30 seconds. It is important for the American people to understand that if you follow the idiocy that's in the bipartisan infrastructure agreement, which is going to make natural gas harder to procure, we're actually not going to have lower emissions. We're going to have higher, because you're going to have to switch back to coal-fired plants. And just for the record, let's also say the world will always demand energy. If you're not getting it from us, where we actually do it more safely and more cleanly, you'll get it from Russia, you will get it from China, and they don't care what the climate activists have to say on Twitter. I yield back.
Donalds makes a terrific point. Natural gas has overtaken coal as the primary source of energy. And the countries that don't care about the Twitter climate activist are countries like China and Russia, blatantly thumbing their nose at COP26 by not attending. China emits more carbon than the U.S. and the developed world combined. It's a noble thing to want to reduce emissions. I get that. And I think the private sector is following that noble goal. But whatever we do collectively is being offset by China, who doesn't give a damn about what the COP26 is doing. China is increasing its coal plant output. The Bank of China has been investing $35 billion in overseas coal projects, especially as their country faces an energy crisis, which is only going to cause them to consume more and thus pollute more. Joe Biden called climate change an existential threat. He and all these leaders have piled on and made it a doomsday scenario, knowing full well that China has done and will do nothing because they are interested in becoming the world's superpower. And India gave some way off distant goal, while for the next 50 years they continue to pollute without any reductions. The one country who has done something is us, America. Our oil and gas companies have weaned off of coal and gone to natural gas. But no one takes into consideration the costs and means of going fully electric. And do we want to get to the point where we are energy dependent again, especially on nations that don't like us? Under President Trump, we became energy independent. Under Biden, we are being fear-mongered. It's like Greta Thunberg has become his climate czar. She protests this UN conference, but do you see her knocking down Xi Jinping's door or Vlad Putin's door? No. She only targets those nations who have actually reduced their emissions. And here's the main idea of what I want to say. The fear of climate is a climate of fear. It is based on fear and alarmism and existentialism. Recently, Joe Rogan interviewed Michael Schellenberger, a journalist and author who was censored with a false and misleading tag on his Facebook video. Check this out.
What did you say that they objected to?
The main issues were, I point out that we're not in the midst of a mass extinction. A mass extinction is when 75 or 90% of all species on Earth are extinct or going extinct. In fact, only 6% of species are critically endangered, and most of them should or will survive. The other one is I pointed out that natural disasters are not getting worse. Deaths from natural disasters have declined over 90% over the last 100 years. We're just much better at dealing with hurricanes and floods and non-climate related disasters like earthquakes as well. And so what they respond, on the disasters, they point out that there's some evidence that hurricanes are becoming somewhat more intense, but then they leave out the fact that the best available science predicts that hurricanes will become 25% less frequent, but 5% more intense, North Atlantic hurricanes. But even that doesn't matter because we're just so much better at preparing for hurricanes. So like vanishingly few people die. I think something like in the most recent year, I think 2019, something like 400 Americans died of natural disasters, right? It's like 300, because I was like 300 times more people died of drug deaths in the United States than from natural disasters. I mean, this is how these two books work together. Is me as someone that considers myself liberal or moderate. I used to be progressive. I don't use that label anymore. But my view is the drug crisis is objectively a much bigger threat to human life and to civilization than climate change. Like, we're adapted really well to climate change. We should do something about it. It's real. There are risks associated with it. But there's no scenario in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of climate change killing 93,000 Americans a year. In fact, there's no scenario of it increasing deaths from natural disasters at all.
He goes on to talk about why those who are such climate change alarmists are opposed to the real solutions to reducing carbon emissions. Take a careful listen to this.
Basically, the three things won't surprise you. There's financial interests. There's just sort of a broader will to power, both kind of status and politics, and just kind of, I'm going to jet around the world and tell people how to live their lives.
Which is hilarious and often happens.
Yes. And then the third is religion, and that, the death of God, what Nietzsche called the death of God, which is basically we just stop believing in traditional religions, whether it's Judaism or Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism. As we stop believing in traditional religions, we still have a fear of death. We still have a need to believe in some higher power. And so we make new religions. And the problem with the new religions, whether it's climate apocalypse, wokeism or victimology, the problem is that the people that are the adherents to those new religions don't think that they're promoting a new religion. They think that they're just being more compassionate, or I'm just being more sensitive, or whatever.
Yeah.
So they're actually more dogmatic than the people in the traditional religions, because you meet people that have even evangelical views. They'll always be like, well, I am an evangelical Christian, right? So they have some awareness of it. But folks that are, they don't Like, these people don't go, well, I am an apocalyptic environmentalist. What they say is, they go, I'm more aware of the science, or, I just love nature and I just care about poor people more than you. It's always cast in some sort of highly charged, moralizing framework.
Schellenberger lays out the framework in such an astute way of why apocalyptic climate activists have created a new religion. It doesn't follow science, it follows dogma and emotion, and gives them a moral superiority. It's interesting how Schellenberger points out Nietzsche, who said that without religion, people begin to make one up. And they have found one in climate change. It's certainly not one based on God or intelligent design. It's based on arbitrary Mother Nature and the hubris of us being able to tinker with Mother Nature to tamp her temperatures down. The various climate cycles we have had, dating back hundreds of thousands of years, can be viewed as the result of the Earth's axis. Temperatures seem to rise and fall concurrently with greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane. The ice ages we have had and subsequent warming, of which there are 4 cycles, 3 of them were before the Industrial Revolution. So man had nothing to do with these rises or declines in temperature. In an interview with Dr. Patrick Michaels, director of the Center of the Study of Science at the Cato Institute, Michaels talks about a lot of the climate models being wrong, the premise of which is the basis for all governmental policy. He speaks about noble cause corruption. This is a psychological phenomenon in which a person pursuing a noble cause becomes so entangled in that cause that emotion of the end result overtakes reason. It's very much like confirmation bias, in which you see things a certain way because you want to see them that way. Noble cause corruption is hard because it follows the scientist rather than the science. For instance, if a person believes so badly that humans and carbon dioxide are causing the Earth to warm and we will all die, then you will be so fixated on correcting that you might corrupt the data or models just to prove your hypothesis. There's the crux of the matter in Dr. Michaels' words.
Not the science that's determining how much it's going to warm. A lot of people don't know this, but it happens to be true. And, we could speculate as to why that paper was published right before the 2016 election. I wouldn't want to impute causation, but
But I want to ask you about causation.
Sure.
You have 31 governments.
No, the 31 different models. Some of
All
them.
right, 31 different models,
Yeah.
but multiple governments.
Right.
Who are fudging the numbers.
They're not fudging them.
They're fudging the models.
Parameterizing.
Okay, well, you use the word fudging. Does our EPA do that? Does NASA do that? Who does that for us?
Good question, Mark. Because the EPA was told by the Supreme Court in 2007 that if it found that carbon dioxide endangered human health and welfare, that it had the power to regulate it under the Clean Air Act.
This is the Massachusetts
That's
case.
Mass v. EPA. Well, they produced an endangerment finding, 2009. And the endangerment finding for its prospective climate is 100%. I didn't say 90%. I said 100% based on those models. So if you can demonstrate that those models systematically are not working, you can take down the endangerment finding. And that would be the basis for all those policies that came out of the Obama administration.
Which would mean you don't get to regulate
Absolutely.
carbon dioxide.
Absolutely. The endangerment finding is the heart of the matter.
So it's all about the endangerment finding that results from the climate models, of which there are 30 or so of them that say the same exact thing except for one. I think a lot of this started with Al Gore and his documentary An Inconvenient Truth. Do you remember the hockey stick graph? And then they had to change the phrase global warming to climate change because the Earth wasn't always warming. Listen to how Dr. Michaels shows how the stats are getting cherry-picked.
Since we got global records that begin in 1970, and you would think there would be some relationship between that integrated energy and global warming. After all, it's only logical. Vice President Gore says that must be the case. It's not. There's no relationship whatsoever between the accumulated cyclone energy and the surface temperature of the Earth. It's just not there. Now, wait a minute. Why does our government say this? They said it in their last report called Global Climate Change Impacts in the United States. They said, oh, there's been a significant increase in hurricane power in the Atlantic Ocean from like 1970 to 2009 or something like that, 1980 to 2009. Well, wait a minute. Why'd you stop in 2009? It's a 2014 report. Because if you take the data after 2009, the increase goes away and it goes back to where it was. Or why did you start in the mid-1970s? Because we have records that are really good back to 1920. And if you look 1920 to 1950, you see an increase that is exactly the same as the one that occurred.
So the information they're providing us
is skewed.
Incomplete. It's skewed.
It's skewed. They're cherry picking.
The climate has its ebbs and flows. Because we can't monkey with nature like we think we can, even with a major self-regulating system. Well, I don't claim to be a climate expert at all. I'm not a climate denier. That's what the fanatics use to denigrate people. I'm a climate realist. I'm concerned. That means that I understand that hundreds of thousands of years, even millions, have allowed nature to run its course. Some of it is nice and some of it is violent, like volcanoes and earthquakes and hurricanes. But to have the hubris to think that we can change any of it is problematic. We have had major shifts in climate that have nothing to do with us. And we think we can change a self-regulating system that's way bigger than us? And think of the reasons why climate change activists are the way that they are. Initially, I think it was about the regulation of industry. You create the crisis, you get to regulate the crisis. You tax carbon, you tax companies. You can then tax individuals. I don't like the motive behind these climate folks. It's not denial to question their motives. And then when it becomes religious in a way, a zealotry only eclipsed by Tibetan monks or Al-Qaeda, you have to wonder. And the ironic part is that those people using climate as a religion want no part of a theory of intelligent design or God, because that might mean that he is in control of things and that they are not. The massive ego and pride lie in the fact that we think we can change this. They will use words like, we are testing Mother Nature, but there's no way they'd say, we are testing God. And that's the problem within the scientific community right now. In pursuing theories, they look for the result they want and work backwards, rather than the other way around. When they say, all scientists agree, that is not true. There are scientists out there that do not agree with these models, but they get silenced or cut out of studies or articles. Bill Gates has bought up a bunch of farmland right here in the US. Why? Well, he's in bed with Monsanto, the company that genetically modifies food. Think about it. If the plan is to get rid of certain kinds of livestock or agriculture because of burning fossil fuels or methane from cow flatulence, who would stand to benefit from that? Truly, one of our aces in the hole with China is that they agreed to buy a lot of agriculture from us because they don't have it. If we kill all of our agriculture and meat exports, then what do we rely on? Who do we rely on? It's really our only card to hold against China, other than the tariffs that Trump imposed that now Joe Biden wants to lift. He's completely kowtowing to them. World leaders agreed upon a 15% global corporate tax coming out of the G20 summit in Rome. This is supposed to raise $150 billion in new tax revenues. Look, I'm all for corporations paying their fair share, especially Amazon or Facebook or Meta, whatever they call it now, and all the big boys that make a killing off of our stupidity, frankly. But I have to know where this tax revenue is going. Is it for the big social spending? Climate spending? Sure sounds like it. And once again, does this apply to China? And then you look at the lunacy of the Biden administration paying $450,000 to each immigrant affected by family separation during the Trump administration. Can you even fathom this? We're coming out of a pandemic where many people really struggled and businesses had to close up shop for good. And they want to pay $450K for people who came across the border illegally? What is the logic in that? The problem with this whole charade is that it preys upon emotions, especially fear, much the same way the pandemic preyed on our worst fears. Oh my God, we're all gonna die. They use words like existential crisis. But do you really think every single world leader's motives are pure and altruistic? Or are the scientist methods truly scientific? Or are they serving the person or organization who is paying them for the study? I mentioned to you in a past episode that the Gates Foundation donates billions to health research, and no one will speak ill of them because they don't want to lose their funding. So it's all biased. It's not free from influence. It's the same question as why is Fauci preventing you from getting certain types of treatment for COVID, but only pushing the vaccine? He's getting involved in your health. So with these climate folks, just because they have some big conference does not necessarily mean it's an existential threat. After all, what did the United Nations do about radical Islam? What do they do about China? They are impotent. So rejoining the Paris Climate Accord is nothing but a way to feel good about ourselves when everything good we do is offset by countries who aren't interested in pitching in. I think we all support clean air and clean water and clean streets and clean cities, but the mission to combat climate change as it is has an agenda to it. It has become a religion in a post-religious world. For every so-called expert they bring in to show you a hockey stick graph, there are other scientists that will tell you that's conjecture and not observable, that such a graph has been tuned or parameterized. They know that people don't know this because it's not transparent. On the list of things that will cause the most mass destruction in the world, climate change is not even in the top 5. Bioweapons would be in the top 2 or 3. Because if indeed this virus was used as a bioweapon, we're in trouble. There are too many bad actors out there that would lasso such a weapon. Cardiovascular diseases are the #1 cause of death globally. Cancer is right there behind it. If you look at this chart as leading risk factors for death in 2017, they mention air pollution, both indoor and outdoor, as the 4th biggest risk. Or how about this chart for younger people? Natural disasters are the 3rd lowest. According to Our World in Data, deaths from natural disasters have declined in the last century from millions to 60,000 per year on average, or 0.1% over the last decade. The deadliest natural disaster? Earthquakes. And the places that feel the hardest hit are lower income nations where infrastructure is poor. So if they kill just 0.1% of people globally and are low on the totem pole, why is everyone telling you that we're all going to burn up and die? We can't change earthquakes, volcanoes, or other natural disasters. We actually have advanced enough to be able to warn people when devastating hurricanes are on their way. Structures are built stronger now, which is why the deaths are lower. Now, as far as damage goes, sure, the damage can be severe, but that's because we have more stuff that we have built that can get damaged, from roads to roofs to buildings. So yes, there may be more damage, but as a percentage of GDP, it's very, very small. What we need to be doing is more preparedness, better evacuation routes, quicker action from FEMA and local and state governments and authorities. Look, it's a noble thing to want a better environment, but statistically speaking, these climate events are not causing more death. The trend is downward. Even if we were contributing to a slight warming, we don't account for most of it. And the environment regulates itself, as it has for centuries and millennia. The problem is that climate change, as it has been called now, is part of an agenda, and the solutions being offered are not necessarily the most effective ones. For instance, states are closing down nuclear power plants. I'll save alternative energy opportunities for another day. But America had finally become energy independent, and that's a huge win for us. And we sit on lots of natural gas, solar, wind, nuclear, geothermal, whatever. Let's explore it all. But whatever we do, we have to be thinking of being self-sufficient. And I don't know if anyone has considered the dangers of being all electric, especially with EMPs or electromagnetic pulses, and hackers get more clever. That opens up any power grid to vulnerability. And then it won't be gas shortages we will be worrying about, but electric shortages. These cars can only go so far before they require recharge. Hell, look at our cell phones. We are always hugging a socket, are we not? And the lithium from the batteries comes from, you guessed it, China. So when we look at all of this geopolitically, we are not making the best decisions, but we are making policy decisions based upon conjectural models and decisions that open us up to other forms of attack or dependency. I'm fully open to listening to all kinds of solutions, especially from the private sector. But when you realize that you have a far greater chance of dying from poor eating habits, or smoking, or strokes and cancer, or even driving down the street, you'll put things into perspective. Don't be brainwashed by Greta Thunberg just because she has conviction. Don't be swayed by Michael Bloomberg and Bill Gates, who stand to financially benefit from this. You don't have to be a climate denier to be a climate realist, or even climate concerned. You just have to abandon the climate apocalypse as a religion. I'm Beau, and that's the show.